I am a surgeon and have been teaching for some time, and for 13 years I have lived in the company of cadavers. During my career, I studied anatomy in depth, so I can write without presumption about death. Jesus entered into agony in Gethsemane, and his sweat became like drops of blood falling to the ground. The only evangelist who reports this is a physician, Luke. It is produced under exceptional conditions, and to provoke it, a physical weakness accompanied by a violent moral collapse caused by a deep emotion is necessary. By great fear, terror, fright, or the terrible anguish of feeling oneself bearing all the sins of men must have crushed Jesus. Extreme tension causes the rupture of the finest capillaries that are on the sweat glands, and the blood mixes with the sweat and concentrates on the skin, then flowing all over the body to the ground. Not long ago, I met one of my father's friends who is quite different from us. How is he different from us? His nervous system does not react to any type of anesthesia, nothing since he was a child. In short, no type of anesthesia works on him, and due to a tumor that was discovered, he had to travel to the United States to undergo surgery. He told us that he was then taken to the operating room and tied up from head to toe, his arms, because he would feel the entire surgery. He told us that in the United States, they charge by the hour, not by the procedure. He said that before they started the surgery, the doctors started the stopwatch. Time went by, layer by layer. He told us that when the surgery ended, the doctors stopped the stopwatch, and 7 hours and 40 minutes had passed. He spent almost 8 hours on that surgical table, open, conscious, feeling everything. He is an Asian man. Like me, he is indeed. He told us that when he realized it, he looked back at his body, and his entire body had turned black because he had sweated blood. Just so the brothers understand the state of mind that leads someone to sweat blood, the terror, the fright, the terrible anguish of feeling oneself bearing all the sins of men must have crushed Jesus. We know the farce of the process prepared by the religious leaders, the sending of Jesus to Pilate, and the tie-breaking between Herod and Pilate. Pilate had to give in, so he ordered the flogging, the scourging of Jesus. The soldiers stripped Jesus of his clothes and tied him by the wrists to a column of the courtyard. The flogging is carried out with multiple leather straps to which lead balls and small bones are attached. The executioners were likely two, one on each side, of different statures, and they competed with lashes. The skin, already altered by millions of microscopic hemorrhages from the blood sweat, is flayed and breaks open. Blood splatters with each blow. Jesus reacts with a jolt of pain. His strength wanes, cold sweat on his brow. His head spins in a vertigo of nausea, and chills run along his back. If he were not held up by his wrists, he would collapse into a pool of blood. Then the mockery of the crowning with long thorns harder than those of acacia. The executioners weave a sort of helmet, place it on Jesus' head, and the thorns penetrate the scalp, causing bleeding. Surgeons know how much the scalp bleeds. Pilate, after showing the crowd that lacerated man, hands him over to be crucified. They place the large horizontal beam of the cross on Jesus' shoulders, which weighs about 50 kilos. The vertical stake is already planted on Calvary. Jesus walks barefoot on the uneven rocky ground, the soldiers leading him. The path is about 600 meters. Jesus, exhausted, drags one foot after the other, frequently falling to his knees. His shoulders are covered in wounds, and when he falls, he slips. They force him up again. At the crucifixion, the executioners strip the condemned man of his clothes, but his tunic is stuck to the wounds. Removing it causes pain. Those who have ever removed a gauze bandage from a large wound understand what this means. Each thread of the fabric adheres to the raw flesh, and when the tunic is taken off, the nerve endings exposed by the wounds are violently tugged at, risking a syncope from the pain. But this is not the end. The blood begins to flow again. Jesus is laid on his back on his wounds on the horizontal beam of the cross. The executioners take measurements. With a drill, they make a hole in the wood to facilitate the penetration of the nails. The executioners take a nail, a long, square nail, place it on Jesus' wrist, and with a precise hammer blow, drive it into the wood. Jesus must have grimaced horribly. The median nerve was damaged. One can imagine what Jesus must have felt, a searing, agonizing pain spreading through his fingers, radiating up to his shoulders and reaching his brain. The most unbearable pain a man can experience. The pain produced by damage to the major nerve trunks, causing syncope and loss of consciousness. But in Jesus, the nerve is only partially destroyed. The nerve trunk lesion remains in contact with the nail, and when the body is suspended on the cross, the nerve will stretch tautly like a violin string, and with every jolt and every movement it will vibrate, eliciting sharp, searing pain. Jesus' shoulders rub painfully against the rough wood, and the sharp points of the large crown of thorns cause his head to tilt forward, since the crown's diameter prevents him from resting his head against the wood. Every time he raises his head, sharp pangs of pain begin again. They nail his feet. By noon, Jesus is thirsty. He hasn't drunk since the previous afternoon and is dehydrated from losing so much blood. His body is a mask of blood, his mouth half open, his lower lip starting to crack, and his dry throat burns, but he cannot swallow. He is thirsty. A soldier extends a sponge soaked in sour wine on the tip of a rod, a drink used by the military. All of this is torture. Suddenly, a strange phenomenon occurs in Jesus' body. The muscles of his arms stiffen in an intensifying contraction. His biceps stretch and rise, his fingers curl, resembling someone stricken with tetanus, a condition doctors call tetany. When the symptoms become generalized, the abdominal muscles stiffen in rigid waves, then the muscles between the ribs, followed by the neck muscles, and finally, the respiratory muscles. Breathing becomes increasingly shallow, air enters, but can no longer exit. Jesus breathes with the tips of his lungs, gasping for air like an asthmatic in a severe attack. His pale face turns red, then transforms into a deep purple. Jesus is enveloped in asphyxia. His lungs, filled with air, can no longer empty. His forehead is drenched with sweat, and his eyes bulge out of their sockets. But suddenly something happens. Slowly, with superhuman effort, Jesus pushes against the nail in his feet. With small, laborious movements, he raises himself, relieving the tension in his arms. The muscles of his chest extend, breathing becomes broader and deeper, the lungs empty, and his face regains its initial pallor. But why this effort? Because Jesus wants to say, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." And soon after, Jesus' body begins to sag again, and asphyxia resumes. 7 phrases are transmitted that he pronounced on the cross, and each time he wants to speak, he has to lift himself using the nail in his feet as support. Unimaginable. Attracted by the blood still flowing and coagulated, swarms of flies buzz around his body, but he cannot shoo them away. Shortly after, the sky darkens, the sun hides suddenly, and the temperature drops. Soon it will be 3 in the afternoon. After hours and hours of torture, all his pains, his thirst, all the cramps, all the asphyxia, all the throbbing of the median nerves draw out a cry. My God, why have you forsaken me?" Jesus shouts, "It is finished," and then in a great cry, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit," and he died in my place in heaven. Why? Why did Jesus die on the cross? Because Jesus died on the cross so that all suffering could end, and that is the last thing we need to know. We need to know that all of this, all the crying, everything, will end. It will end thanks to God's suffering. All crying, all lamenting will cease to exist.